Hi everyone, this video is going to take you through how to navigate the risk-based tabs on the dashboard and show you how you're performing against the retail risk and risk drivers defined in the Retail Risk Register, which is a document that details the key market risks that have been identified by the PAB. Within this video, I'm going to cover how to step through the risk-based tabs, what you should look at if you find you're over threshold, and more generally, what should you pay attention to each month. The three tabs of interest for this video are the overall score, the retail risk summary, and the risk driver summary. The overall score is the most aggregated view. The risk driver summary is the most detailed. Starting with the overall score tab, the purpose of this tab is to provide an aggregate view of how each party is performing against their peers across all risks. Here you can see the main visual of interest, which is a graph displaying a plot of the highest normalized risk score for each party achieved during the month against the percentage of scores in which the party was above the PAB thresholds, with the PAB thresholds being a level of performance at a risk driver level that guides performance assurance intervention and techniques. The colours on the graph provide an indication of what good and bad may look like. For example, to land in the red square, it would indicate that your scores are generally high, high being worse, and that you also breach the PAB thresholds in the majority of risks. Moving on to the right side, you can see two industry level summary figures here, and a table showing some key pieces of information and metrics about your organization. So for example, your annual rating and contributing factors, and also information about performance assurance techniques and your maintenance and qualification. Moving on to the next tab, you can see how you perform here at a retail risk level. A single retail risk is a top-level market risk that is not necessarily measurable in itself and may have many contributing factors. So for example, one of our risks is retail risk 12, which is erroneous switches occur, which result in a negative customer experience of the energy market. This risk is made of several risk drivers, for example, the rate of erroneous switches, and also completion of the various steps required to resolve an erroneous switch within the timelines defined in the reg. This tab has two views, an above threshold view and a number of exceptions view. The threshold view tells you on which retail risks you have breached threshold on one or more instances in the month, and also how you are trending over time in terms of the number of retail risks where you have exceeded threshold. The number of exceptions view simply tells you under which retail risks you have had a risk driver that has been identified as having an exception, so a minor or major, using the terminology we'll get to later in the risk driver summary tab. The above threshold tab is where you want to pay more attention, as if you breach the PAB threshold, and in particular breach a PAB threshold for multiple months in a row, it is likely you'll be subject to some form of performance assurance technique or engagement from the co-manager. If you find you are over threshold, you'll want to drill down further into the data to identify specifically under what risk driver you exceeded the threshold and investigate why that was the case. So to do that, you have two options. So you can either click on the particular retail risk in the table here at the bottom, which opens up the drill down option, or you can simply click on the risk driver summary tab and apply the filters yourself manually. So I'm going to filter down to retail risk 8 and risk driver 8.7. So I can actually see that only one of my organizations is above threshold. So before closing this, I'm going to further filter down to just that one organization. So now I've filtered down to the specific instance of threshold breach. There are a few key pieces of information I'm interested in looking at. Firstly, the detail of the risk driver in question, which is displayed here at the bottom of the tab. Particularly, I'm interested in what the threshold was, which I can display if I hover over it, this bottom right corner here. If I wanted to, I could then look at the retail risk register to find the full set of information about this particular risk driver. I'm then, in terms of the data, there are a few things I'm interested in. So firstly, going to the risk score here, I'm interested in knowing whether my scores have been consistent over time or whether it's been a sudden spike that has driven the threshold breach. So I can see here that over the past 5 months, 4 months have been around the 0.3 level. So what I would do, or what I would be interested in, is knowing whether in those prior months I was also above the PAB threshold. So just going to the assurance period filter here, I'm just going to quickly flick back. And I can see here, yes, I was also above threshold in October and September as well. So if it was a sudden spike I was seeing, rather than this consistent level of performance, it may indicate that it was a specific or one-off event that drove the threshold breach. If the scores are more consistent over time, it may be a particular systematic issue. Similarly, I would like to also look at the exception level breakdown. So I'd look at the number of minors over time. And I can quickly see here that there was a sudden spike in September. So this is something I may want to investigate specifically. Then I could also look at the number of majors, of which I can see there were none. So I need to do, there's no further action I need to take here. Okay, so the next thing I would like to do is drill down and try and work out the particular meter points that drove this exception breach or threshold breach. So I'm going to click here on the row in the table at the top and then click on the drill down option, which is going to take me to a pre-filtered tab which displays all the MPXNs that were identified as exceptions in this risk driver. So the main piece of information here is this table at the bottom, which shows you the specific risk driver, the description of that risk driver, what was specifically measured, the MPXN itself, and you flag it as to whether the MPXN showing is pseudonymized or not. So here you can see it's no, so that indicates that this is the real MPXN, whereas in certain cases this may show as yes, in which this will be a pseudonymized MPXN. There's more information available further down in the wiki about how you can get the real MPXN if it is a pseudonymized MPXN showing. It also tells me what type of exception it was, so minor in this instance, which you already know from the previous tab, and it provides a brief description of what drove or why it was flagged as an exception. So the main thing I would like to do on this tab is actually download this data, so I can then take it offline or provide it to members of my team to investigate further. So I simply do this as per in prior videos by clicking on the More Options button and the Export Data. So then I would go back to the main screen by clicking on the back button here, and then I would go to the Filters pane and remove all filters to see a view for all risk drivers. So I would repeat the prior exercise of drilling down into the data, any cases where I was flagged as above threshold, or any cases where I scored highly but I was not above threshold. The key things I would like to pay attention to in cases like this where I'm not above threshold but scoring highly is whether it's been a sudden spike or consistent level of performance in terms of both risk driver score and the number of exceptions.